There's something that happens when the sun goes down and darkness settles over the world, while others retreat into sleep, preparing to rest and recharge. You come alive. Your mind sharpens, your creativity flows, your senses heighten. The muffled deadness that characterized your daylight hours lifts, and suddenly you feel present, awake, genuinely yourself in ways that daylight never allows. This isn't just about being a night owl or having a different sleep schedule. It's something deeper, more psychological, almost spiritual. The darkness doesn't make you tired. It makes you real. And while the world pathologizes your nocturnal vitality, insisting you should be asleep, something in you knows that night is when your truest self emerges. So why do you feel more alive at night? What is it about darkness that awakens parts of you that remain dormant in daylight? And what can Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who spent significant time exploring his own psychological darkness and who understood that the shadow side of the mind contains profound vitality, teach us about why some souls come alive when the sun goes down? To understand this, we need to start with Jung's revolutionary concept of the shadow and its relationship to consciousness. The shadow in Jungian psychology represents the dark side of the soul, the unadmitted, the inadmissible. It contains everything about ourselves that consciousness has rejected, the qualities, impulses, desires, and aspects of personality that don't fit our idealized self-image. But here's what's crucial and often misunderstood. The shadow doesn't just contain darkness in the moral sense. It contains vitality, creativity, instinct, authentic emotion, everything that civilization and consciousness have suppressed. When you feel more alive at night, you're often experiencing the emergence of shadow material that daylight consciousness keeps locked away. During the day, you operate primarily from your conscious ego, your socialized self, the persona you've constructed to function in the world. This conscious functioning requires enormous energy to maintain. You're constantly monitoring yourself, conforming to expectations, suppressing impulses, performing appropriateness. But at night, particularly when you're alone in darkness, the conscious ego's control loosens. The shadow emerges, and with it comes vitality, creativity, emotional intensity, and authentic feeling that consciousness suppresses. People who feel more alive at night are often those with rich shadow material that consciousness has suppressed, and darkness allows this suppressed vitality to finally emerge and be felt. Jung himself experienced this nocturnal emergence of the unconscious throughout his life, understanding that night is when the psyche's deeper layers become accessible. There's also something profound about what Jung called the compensation principle and how it operates at night. Jung discovered that when conscious attitudes become too one-sided or extreme, the unconscious automatically generates opposing tendencies to restore psychological balance. During the day, consciousness is dominant, rational, controlled, oriented outward towards social demands and practical tasks. This one-sided emphasis on conscious functioning creates imbalance. Night provides the compensatory opposite. When darkness falls and social demands cease, the unconscious compensates for the day's one-sided consciousness by asserting itself, bringing forward the intuitive, emotional, creative, and instinctual dimensions that daylight suppresses. People who feel more alive at night are often experiencing this compensation. Their psyche is balancing the excessive consciousness and rationality of daytime with the unconscious vitality that night allows. The aliveness they feel isn't dysfunction. It's their psyche's natural attempt to restore balance, to give the unconscious its necessary time and space after a day of conscious domination. Jung would recognize this nocturnal vitality as psychologically healthy compensation rather than pathology to be corrected. Let's also consider what modern research has discovered about nocturnal consciousness and its unique qualities. Recent scientific understanding suggests that during nocturnal wakefulness, cognitive capacity and mood regulation are diminished and reason sleeps. But this isn't purely negative. When reason sleeps, when the prefrontal cortex's inhibitory control loosens, other forms of processing emerge. Research shows that night involves attentional biases, negative affect, altered reward processing, and prefrontal disinhibition. What this scientific language describes is essentially the emergence of unconscious processes that daylight consciousness suppresses. The prefrontal disinhibition means that the rational, controlling, socially appropriate conscious mind loosens its grip. The altered reward processing means that desires and impulses that daytime consciousness judges and suppresses become more accessible. The attentional biases mean that you notice different things, particularly emotional and symbolic content, that rational daylight thinking dismisses. People who feel more alive at night are often those whose authentic self requires precisely this disinhibition, this loosening of conscious control, this access to emotional and instinctual processing that daytime rationality prevents. Their nocturnal vitality reflects their true nature, finally being allowed to exist without the constant suppression that daylight demands. There's also something crucial about what Jung called the collective unconscious and its archetypal connection to night and darkness. Throughout human history, across all cultures, night has been associated with the unconscious, with dreams, with the realm, where the rational ego's control diminishes and deeper forces emerge. This isn't just cultural conditioning, it's archetypal, rooted in the collective unconscious that Jung believed all humans share. Night darkness activates ancient archetypal patterns connected to the unconscious, to mystery, to the dissolution of ego boundaries, to encounter with what lies beneath consciousness. When you feel more alive at night, you're partly responding to these archetypal associations, experiencing night as a time when the veil between conscious and unconscious thins, when the deeper layers of psyche become accessible. This archetypal dimension gives nocturnal aliveness a quality that transcends individual psychology. You're not just experiencing your personal shadow, you're touching archetypal depths that night has always represented in human experience. Jung also understood something about introversion and how introverts particularly come alive at night. Remember, Jung defined introversion as orientation of psychic energy toward the inner subjective world. For introverts, external reality is draining, while internal reality is energizing. Daytime is inherently extroverted, demanding external engagement, social interaction, attention to objective tasks and other people. This constant external orientation exhausts introverts, forcing them to operate against their natural energy flow. But night reverses this. When darkness falls and others sleep, external demands cease. The phone stops ringing. Social expectations disappear. The world finally leaves you alone. For introverts, this is liberation. Their energy can finally flow in its natural direction, inward toward thoughts, feelings, reflections, and inner experiences. People who feel more alive at night are often deep introverts whose natural energy orientation is constantly violated by daytime's extroverted demands. Night is when they can finally exist according to their actual nature, when their energy flows freely in its natural inward direction rather than being forced outward against itself. The vitality they experience isn't about darkness per se. It's about finally being free to be introverted, to live from their inner world without constant interruption from external demands. Jung himself was deeply introverted and understood this nocturnal liberation intimately, often working late into the night when his inner world could fully unfold without external interference. There's also something significant about what Jung called active imagination and how it flourishes at night. Active imagination is Jung's technique for engaging consciously with unconscious material, allowing images and figures to arise spontaneously and then interacting with them. This practice requires specific conditions: quietness, solitude, freedom from external demands, and a particular quality of consciousness that's receptive rather than actively controlling. Night provides these conditions perfectly. The darkness itself seems to facilitate the emergence of images from the unconscious. The solitude allows undisturbed engagement. The loosening of conscious control that naturally happens at night makes the receptive state easier to achieve. People who feel more alive at night are often those with rich, active imagination processes that night allows to unfold. Their nocturnal vitality comes partly from being in dialogue with their unconscious, encountering inner figures and narratives that daytime consciousness doesn't permit. They're not just awake at night, they're engaged in profound psychological work that Jung considered essential for individuation, and that simply can't happen during daylight's rational, externally focused consciousness. Let's also consider what Jung understood about the persona and how night allows it to drop. The persona is the social mask we wear to navigate public life. Maintaining this persona requires enormous energy and creates distance from your authentic self. During the day, the persona is necessary and largely unavoidable. You must function socially, play your roles, meet others' expectations. But at night, when you're alone in darkness, the persona can finally be dropped. There's no one to perform for, no social role to maintain, no expectations to fulfill. The relief of dropping the persona, of finally being able to exist without performing, creates profound sense of vitality and authenticity. People who feel more alive at night are often those for whom persona performance is particularly exhausting, or who have particularly large gaps between their persona and their authentic self. Night is when they can finally stop performing, when they can be genuinely themselves without the exhausting work of social presentation. The aliveness they feel is the vitality of authentic being finally allowed to exist without the deadening weight of persona performance. Jung understood this relief intimately, recognizing that genuine psychological health requires regular opportunities to drop the persona and exist authentically, which for many people happens primarily at night. There's also something profound about what Jung called the self and its nocturnal accessibility. The self, in Jung's psychology, is the organizing center of the total personality, the deep source of meaning and wholeness. But the ego often loses connection with the self during daylight's busy, externally focused functioning. At night, particularly in darkness and solitude, the ego self-connection can be restored. The quieting of external demands allows you to hear the self's quiet voice. The darkness facilitates descent into the depths where the self resides. The solitude provides space for genuine encounter with your deeper center. People who feel more alive at night are often experiencing restored connection with the self. The vitality they feel isn't superficial excitement. It's the profound aliveness that comes from being in touch with your deepest center, your source of meaning and authentic direction. Night is when the ego can finally stop its busy external functioning and turn inward toward the self, receiving the guidance and nourishment that this connection provides. Jung spent significant time in nocturnal contemplation precisely for this reason, understanding that self-connection often requires the conditions that night uniquely provides. Jung also understood something about creativity and its nocturnal nature. Throughout history, artists, writers, and creative people have reported that night is when their creativity flows most freely. This isn't coincidental. Creativity emerges from the unconscious, and the unconscious is most accessible when conscious control loosens. During the day, conscious rational thinking dominates, evaluating, judging, controlling. This conscious control inhibits creativity. which requires freedom to explore, to make unexpected connections, to follow intuitions that rational thinking would dismiss. Night provides the disinhibition that creativity requires. When conscious control loosens, when reason sleeps, creative material can emerge freely from the unconscious without immediate rational evaluation and rejection. People who feel more alive at night are often creative people whose creativity is suppressed by daytime consciousness and finally allowed to emerge at night. Their nocturnal vitality is the energy of creative flow, of ideas and connections emerging without the inhibiting interference of rational judgment. Jung himself was deeply creative and understood that creativity requires protected time when unconscious material can emerge without rational consciousness immediately shutting it down. There's also something crucial about what Jung called psychological energy and its nocturnal regeneration patterns. Jung understood that different people have different energy patterns. For some, energy is highest during the day and depletes toward evening. But for others, the pattern is reversed. They wake depleted and gradually build energy throughout the day, reaching their peak at night. This isn't dysfunction or bad sleep hygiene. It's constitutional variation in how psychic energy operates. People who feel more alive at night often have this reversed energy pattern. Their psyche naturally generates peak energy during nocturnal hours. Trying to force them into daytime peak functioning violates their natural rhythm and keeps them chronically operating below their optimal capacity. When they finally honor their natural rhythm and live according to nocturnal vitality, they access their actual energy and capacity rather than constantly fighting their nature. Jung would recognize these energy variations as legitimate typological differences that should be honored rather than pathologized or forced into socially conventional patterns. Let's also consider what Jung understood about the shadow and its positive aspects that night allows access to. The shadow doesn't just contain negative qualities we've repressed, it also contains positive qualities that consciousness has rejected. Creativity, passion, spontaneity, sensuality, playfulness, emotional intensity, all the vitality that socialization and rationalization suppress. When you feel more alive at night, you're often accessing these positive shadow qualities that daylight consciousness keeps locked away. During the day, you must be appropriate, controlled, rational, productive. But at night, you can be passionate, emotional, creative, spontaneous without judgment or social consequences. The vitality you experience comes from finally being able to access and express these shadow qualities that contain genuine life force. People who feel more alive at night often have particularly vibrant positive shadow material that consciousness harshly suppresses, and darkness provides the safe container where this suppressed vitality can finally emerge and be experienced. Jung emphasized that shadow integration means accepting both the dark and the light that consciousness has rejected. And for many people, night is when this integration can finally happen. There's also something significant about what Jung called the numinous and its nocturnal manifestation. The numinous refers to experiences of the sacred, transcendent, or mysteriously meaningful that exceed ordinary consciousness. Throughout human experience, night has been associated with numinous encounters, with experiences of mystery and transcendence that daylight's rational clarity prevents. When conscious, rational thinking quiets at night, when darkness creates a different quality of awareness, numinous experiences become more accessible. You might experience profound insights, mystical feelings of connection, encounters with archetypal imagery, moments when ordinary reality seems to reveal hidden depths. People who feel more alive at night are often experiencing this numinous dimension. Their nocturnal vitality includes encounters with mystery, meaning, and transcendence that daylight rationality dismisses or explains away. Night allows them to exist in the numinous realm where the most meaningful human experiences have always occurred. Jung himself had profound numinous experiences throughout his life and understood that such experiences require conditions that often only night provides, when rational consciousness loosens its grip and allows encounter with what lies beyond it. Jung also understood something about emotional processing and how it happens differently at night. During the day, emotions must often be suppressed or managed to function effectively in social and work contexts. You can't fully feel and process difficult emotions while performing your daily roles. But at night, in solitude and darkness, emotions can finally be fully felt and processed. The tears you held back all day can finally flow. The anger you suppressed can be acknowledged. The grief you carried can be experienced. The joy you didn't have space for can emerge. People who feel more alive at night are often those with rich emotional lives that daytime functioning doesn't allow space for. Night is when they can finally feel fully, process completely, experience their emotional reality without the need to immediately translate it into socially appropriate expression or practical action. This emotional authenticity and depth creates profound sense of aliveness that daytime emotional suppression prevents. Jung understood that emotional integration requires this kind of uninterrupted processing time that daily life rarely provides, and that night uniquely offers. There's also something profound about what Jung called individuation and its relationship to nocturnal consciousness. Individuation requires differentiating yourself from collective patterns and discovering your unique, authentic nature. But this differentiation is nearly impossible during the day when you're immersed in collective life, responding to social demands, conforming to expectations, operating according to conventional schedules and norms. Night provides separation from the collective necessary for individuation. When you're awake while the collective sleeps, you're literally and symbolically outside collective consciousness. This outsider position allows you to observe collective patterns rather than being unconsciously caught in them. It gives you space to discover what's uniquely yours versus what you've absorbed from the collective. People who feel more alive at night are often those for whom individuation is particularly important and who need this nocturnal separation from collective to discover and maintain their authentic individual nature. Their nocturnal vitality reflects the energy of genuine self-discovery that collective immersion prevents. Let's also consider what Jung understood about psychological types and how certain types particularly thrive at night. Jung identified intuitive types as those whose primary function is perceiving patterns, possibilities, and meanings beyond what's immediately visible. Intuition, Jung explained, operates most freely when sensory input is reduced and rational processing quiets. Night provides exactly these conditions. Darkness reduces sensory stimulation. Quietness allows internal processes to dominate. The loosening of rational control permits intuitive perception to operate freely. People who feel more alive at night are often intuitive types, whose primary function is suppressed by daytime's emphasis on sensation and thinking, but finally allowed to operate freely at night. Their nocturnal vitality is the energy of their dominant function finally being able to work according to its nature rather than being constantly overridden by less developed functions that daytime demands. There's also something crucial about what Jung called the relationship with death and how night facilitates necessary mortality awareness. Night and darkness have always been associated with death, not just literally, but symbolically. Night is when consciousness approaches the boundary between waking and sleeping, between life and the little death that sleep represents. This proximity to death-like states can facilitate genuine confrontation with mortality. When you're awake at night, particularly in darkness and silence, you can contemplate death, finitude, the mystery of existence in ways that busy daylight functioning prevents. People who feel more alive at night often have this capacity for mortality awareness that Jung considered essential for authentic living. The paradox is that confronting death makes you feel more alive, more present, more aware of the preciousness and fragility of existence. Their nocturnal vitality includes this intensified aliveness that comes from proximity to death awareness, from existing in the liminal space between consciousness and unconsciousness, where life's fundamental mysteries become tangible. Jung also understood something about the collective unconscious and how archetypal material emerges more readily at night. The collective unconscious contains universal patterns and images shared by all humanity, but accessing this collective layer requires descending below personal consciousness, which daylight, ego functioning, resists. Night facilitates this descent. When personal ego consciousness loosens, when you're not busy maintaining your individual identity and social roles, archetypal material can emerge more freely. You might encounter universal symbols in your thoughts, experience archetypal emotions that exceed your personal situation, have insights that feel like ancient wisdom rather than personal discovery. People who feel more alive at night are often those with strong connections to the collective unconscious, whose psyche regularly accesses these deeper universal layers. Their nocturnal vitality includes the profound energy that comes from touching archetypal depths, from experiencing yourself not just as isolated individual, but as connected to universal human patterns and experiences. There's also something significant about what Jung called the compensation for modern life's demands, and how night provides it. Modern civilization places enormous demands on consciousness. Constant stimulation, rapid decision-making, multitasking, perpetual availability, sensory overload, emotional suppression. These demands create profound psychological imbalance, emphasizing consciousness at the expense of unconsciousness, thinking at the expense of feeling, sensation at the expense of intuition. Night provides compensation for this extreme imbalance. When darkness falls and demands cease, the suppressed dimensions can finally assert themselves. The unconscious gets its time, feeling gets its space, intuition gets its freedom. People who feel more alive at night are often those most oppressed by modern life's one-sided demands, and their nocturnal vitality is their psyche's attempt to restore balance, to give the neglected dimensions their necessary time and recognition. Jung would see this nocturnal aliveness as psychologically healthy compensation rather than dysfunction, understanding that extreme cultural demands require equally extreme compensatory responses. Let's also consider what Jung understood about solitude and its psychological necessity. Jung recognized that genuine psychological development requires periods of solitude, time alone with yourself, without external demands or social performance. But modern life provides little genuine solitude. Even when physically alone during the day, you're often connected digitally, available to interruption, still operating in social mode. Night provides the deep solitude that psychological development requires. When you're awake while others sleep, you're genuinely alone in ways that daytime rarely allows. The world has withdrawn. No one expects anything from you. You can finally be with yourself without interruption. People who feel more alive at night are often those who desperately need this deep solitude that their psyche requires for development and that daytime never provides. Their nocturnal vitality is partly the relief and energy of finally being genuinely alone, finally able to be with themselves without the constant demands and invasions that characterize modern waking life. There's also something profound about what Jung called the transcendent function and how it operates at night. The transcendent function is the psyche's capacity to generate new understanding by holding tension between opposites, allowing symbols and insights to emerge that transcend the conscious-unconscious split. This function requires specific conditions: relaxed consciousness, receptive awareness, freedom from immediate practical demands, and patience to allow understanding to emerge at its own pace. Night provides all these conditions. Consciousness is relaxed, but not absent. Awareness is receptive rather than actively seeking. Practical demands are suspended. Time stretches, allowing slow psychological processes to unfold. People who feel more alive at night are often those whose transcendent function is most active, whose psyche is doing the essential work of generating new understanding and integration that can only happen when these specific conditions exist. Their nocturnal vitality is the energy of genuine psychological creativity, of the psyche doing its deepest work of creating meaning and wholeness. Jung also understood something about rebellion and how nocturnal living can be an act of individuation against collective norms. Society insists on diurnal living, treating nocturnal preferences as pathology to be corrected. This collective insistence itself can become oppressive, one more way that the collective demands conformity. When you honor your nocturnal vitality despite social pressure, you're engaging in a small but significant act of individuation, choosing your authentic nature over collective demands. People who feel more alive at night and who honor this reality rather than fighting it are often demonstrating the courage to live according to their actual nature despite collective disapproval. This rebellion isn't childish defiance. It's the mature refusal to violate your authentic self, to conform to arbitrary social norms that don't serve your actual development. Jung himself frequently violated conventional schedules and norms when his work required it, understanding that individuation sometimes means consciously choosing to live differently than the collective demands. Finally, there's something to be said about what Jung called the conjunctio and the necessary union of light and darkness. Jung believed that psychological wholeness requires integrating opposites rather than choosing one side. In the context of day and night, this means honoring both rather than forcing yourself to be exclusively diurnal. The healthiest relationship might not be choosing either day or night, but finding your own integration. Perhaps being active both during preferred nocturnal hours and managing necessary daytime functioning, or alternating between periods of nocturnal and diurnal living as your psyche requires. People who feel more alive at night shouldn't necessarily force themselves to become diurnal, but they also shouldn't completely abandon daytime functioning if circumstances require some diurnal activity. The goal is conjunctio, finding the unique integration that honors both your nocturnal vitality and the practical realities of living in a diurnal world. In the end, why you feel more alive at night is multifaceted, but fundamentally about psychological authenticity and depth. You're experiencing the emergence of shadow vitality that consciousness suppresses. You're benefiting from the unconscious compensation for daytime's one-sided consciousness. You're accessing the disinhibited state where creativity and authentic emotion can flow. You're operating according to your introverted or intuitive nature that daytime violates. You're experiencing ego self-connection that busy daylight prevents. You're dropping the exhausting persona and existing authentically. You're engaging in active imagination and psychological work that requires nocturnal conditions. You're accessing positive shadow qualities and numinous experiences. You're processing emotions fully without daytime suppression. You're experiencing separation from collective necessary for individuation. You're following your natural energy rhythm rather than forcing conventional patterns. You're in deep solitude that psychological development requires. And you're touching archetypal depths and transcendent functions that only emerge when consciousness loosens its grip. Carl Jung would not pathologize your nocturnal vitality, but recognize it as psychological authenticity, expressing itself in the only conditions that allow it. He would understand that night is when certain psychological processes can finally occur, when certain aspects of personality can finally exist, when the full range of human consciousness can finally be experienced beyond the narrow, rational daylight functioning that modern life demands. Your feeling more alive at night isn't dysfunction, disorder, or problem to be solved. It's your psyche telling you when it can finally be itself, when the conditions are right for genuine psychological life to unfold, when you can finally exist as the complex, deep, creative, emotional, intuitive, authentic being that you actually are beneath the narrow, conscious persona that daylight demands. Jung himself understood this intimately, spending countless nocturnal hours in the psychological work that became his life's contribution, understanding that certain truths only reveal themselves in darkness, that certain dimensions of consciousness only open at night, and that honoring your nocturnal vitality might be one of the most important acts of psychological integrity you can perform in a world that relentlessly demands that everyone conform to the same arbitrary diurnal rhythm, regardless of their actual psychological nature and needs.